What's up, tribe? How you guys doing? Excuse me. Welcome back to my channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you like this video. This is going to be my rant and review for Sylvie's. I was going to say Sylvie's Choice, Lord. Sylvie's Love, Amazon Prime original. So there are going to be spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet, or you don't want to hear the spoilers, I will give you a moment to click off. But go watch the movie and then come back. Okay? Go watch the movie and come back to hear what I have to say. But if you watch the movie, let's chat a few minutes about it, okay? So first of all, let's talk about the movie itself. It's a Amazon Prime original movie. I think it's one of those movies that originally was going to come out in the theater, but due to, what's going on in the world, it went directly to Amazon Prime. It is produced by the main character, the person who plays Robert, Kerry Washington's husband, used to play in the NFL. I'm not going to sit here and butcher that man's name. Every time I say it wrong, but y'all know who I'm talking about, okay? And I saw a story on him a few months ago on Real Sports. I don't know if you guys know the show Real Sports comes on HBO, hosted by Bryant Gumbel, where they did a profile of him and they talked about his transition from football into acting. And he was actually starring on Broadway in A Soldier Story. Y'all know A Soldier Story, the play that was turned into a movie many years ago. It was on Broadway before the world shut down. And so he was starring in that. And so it chronicled that. Also, I don't think a lot of people realize that he also co-produced American Son with Kerry Washington. Again, I think that was on Netflix last year. I think it came out in 2019. So he's been working on this transition, right? He's been working on this transition. So first of all, let me talk about the movie itself. As far as it's a period piece. Period pieces are always hard because you have to recreate the music, you have to recreate the look, you have to recreate the clothes. In some cases, you have to recreate the lingo, the language, the slang, right? Make sure that we don't slide things in that may or may not have been accurate in that time period. I remember the movie Posse, which I love, is one of my favorite movies. It's like a real, in my mind, a cult classic with Mario Van Peebles. And I remember Vesta, rest in peace, played, she was a singer, but I think she's also like a madam, right? And I remember one of the criticisms of the movie Posse was the fact that Mario Van Peebles didn't pay enough attention to what would or would not have been accurate in that time period. And one of the things they talked about was the fact that Vesta had on these acrylic nails with these French manicures, and they were like, well, no madam in the 1800s walking around with acrylic nails with French manicures, right? So those are the types of things you have to look at. And so the movie starts in 1964, and then they flash back 5 years, so we go back to 1957. And I think, in my estimation, from where I was sitting as a viewer, I think they did a pretty damn good job, right? I feel like the cinematography was on point. I feel like the wardrobe, what people would have worn, what it would have looked like. I mean, I could feel it. I could smell it. Like, I mean, seriously, like I could smell New York. I could feel New York, right? The music on point, even the mindset that in the 1950s jazz was still king, right? Jazz was still king. And we meet the two characters. So we see a brief snippet in 1962. Yeah, 1962. We see a brief little snippet in 1962 where we see our main character, who's played by Tess Thompson, Sylvie, standing out front of like an opera house in her full opera garb. She's got the gloves and beautiful gown, and she's waiting to go in to see Dinah Washington. Was it Dinah Washington? Oh shoot, I didn't write it down. I think it was Dinah Washington. And Robert, we see him leaving a jam session, or a recording session, I should say, and he's coming out of the studio. He's walking by, and he stops to look at the billboard advertising this particular concert. They see each other, and she was like, Robert? And he was like, Sylvie? And then then they give us 5 years before. So we see these characters meet. And they meet. He's a musician, sort of struggling at the time. she's working in her dad's record shop. And what we find out immediately is she's engaged and her soon to be husband is fighting in the Korean War. And we also find out that she is a part of that upper middle class, right? So here's what I love about the movie. I think so many times when black movies are made during this time period, I feel like the creator of the movie always feels obligated to give us a scene or a moment where we just see this overt racism, right? I think they feel obligated to show us the struggle, to show us how bad it was, to show us how segregation was just so. And I can appreciate those moments when they are appropriate. But what I can also appreciate is in a movie like this where they didn't feel like they had to jam that down our throat. And we could just see a movie where we saw black people doing great things. We saw that upper middle class, that the society. Her mother ran a charm school, one of the most successful charm schools, widely recognized, and she was a debutante that was presented, and her husband, or soon to be husband's father, was a doctor who was nationally recognized, and she was clear to say one of the best known whatever in the country, notwithstanding the fact that he's colored. So meaning amongst his white peers, he was considered to be one of the best. I love that because I think we need to see that as much as we need to understand the struggle. Like, I get it. There were a few scenes. There were a few scenes. There was one in particular where her husband, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, where her husband was up for a promotion, and when the men went out on the outside to smoke a cigar after dinner, she was talking to his wife, and they were white, and she made mention about the NAACP, and so Sylvie was like, NAACP. She said, "Oh yeah, well, his company has been targeted as by the NAACP, basically as having." Some not so nice racial practices. And so essentially her husband was getting this promotion because he was black, not so much because he was the most qualified, although he may have been. But I thought that was a nice way of showing again how the struggle took place, not just on the front lines, not just at the lunch counters, but how the struggle was taking place even in upper middle class black society. We were dealing with these issues. And so kudos, because I just think that's important for us to see. Okay, now let's get back to this to the story a little bit. So then we see he goes in. Robert, the main character, he goes in. There's a help wanted sign in the window, and it's this whole cute thing about how her father really doesn't need help, but mother didn't want anybody to think that they were desperate and that they were struggling, because she was at her dad's record shop every day to watch TV. She was in love with TV. Her dream was to become a TV producer one day. That was all she wanted. And her dad, to her face, her dad never discouraged her dream. But when he was talking to Robert, he was like, she thinks she's going to be the first black, producer, picture that, a colored woman, producing TV. And I like to see that even though they had accomplished some things, they were living that good life. We see that they had a nice house, nice brownstone, and it looked like a nice neighborhood. Looked like they clearly had a little bit of change. The fact that her father was like, even with all that we are and where we are still colored, and that ain't gonna happen, right? But he never to her face did it. He felt it the way he felt, and I'm sure their mother felt the way they felt. But I feel like they were comforted in the fact that she can have her little fantasies, she can feel the way she gonna feel, but at the end of the day, when her fiance get home, that's what she gonna be married. He's gonna be able to take care of her. She gonna be a nice housewife, so she can have those fantasies, but it's not gonna hurt her. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we don't have a backup plan for her. So that's great that she feel that way. It ain't what's gonna really happen, but we'll let her live in her love, and so we see them fall in love through the summer. Like, I'm not gonna go through scene by scene, line by line, but we see them. He starts working at the record shop, and she's, clear in the beginning, I have a fiance, and he, from the very beginning, is not concerned about the fact that she has a fiance. Like, I don't think that he wasn't overly disrespectful of it, but he certainly wasn't like she's off limits. He was sort of like, he ain't here. I'm just saying. It was a really cute scene where they got locked in the basement, and he could get out the basement the whole time, but he allowed them to have some time to sort of talk, laugh, get to know each other. And then when he felt like they had sort of had that moment, then he took a bobby pin out of her hair and got them out of the basement. So, it was like he knew, it was like he was creating these moments. He invited her to come to his so yeah, so then we meet her cousin who's also her best friend, Mona, and she always introduced herself like the Mona Lisa, honey. Um, Now her sister is the wild child. I mean, her cousin is the wild child, and what we find out is that basically her mother, Sylvie's mother, made her and the fiance get engaged because she caught them fooling around. So there was that. Now, but you don't get the impression that it was the total love match, right? From Sylvie, you never get that impression. So we see them. Robert invites her to come down to his club. Well, the club where he's playing. He's in a quartet, and that's the night that I think that's the night they fell in love, right? But we also see that the cousin started hanging out with one of his band members. So that night he walks her home and he ends up giving her a kiss on her front stoop. I was like, girl, who was gonna see you out here kissing another man knowing you all engaged with a whole man over in Korea? But okay. And so the next day her mother comes by the record shop and her mother sees that they are a little too cozy, right? And her mother tells her, she said, listen, we do not fraternize with people who are not on our station. Basically, he is beneath you, and I mean, he cool to work here, but we're not taking that any further. Okay, we're not going any further with that. It's we work here and it's cool, but we ain't taking that no further. And so she basically lets him know, listen, what happened last night, it was a kiss, it was cool, it was what it was, but it can't happen again. And so he was going to invite her to a birthday party. And he couldn't even get it out good before she basically shut him down. So he was like, okay, cool. Well, the cousin ended up taking her to the birthday party because remember, the cousin is messing with the other band member. And she was like, well, I didn't know you were going to be here. And honey, he ignored her the whole night. But of course, by the end of the night, they talked, they made up, and then they ended up dancing in the middle of the street, child. And they were dancing to Johnny Mathis, To Be Loved. And every time I hear that song, all I think about is Coming to America. So it was hard for me to take that moment seriously because all I see is Eddie Murphy singing that song and yelling over his balcony and his neighbors telling him to shut the F up, right? So the moment was lost on me, but it was a touching moment. So like I said, we see them fall in love, and what ends up happening is Robert's band has an opportunity to go to Paris to play. And he asked her to come with him. Now, I'm thinking, good and well she ain't about to go to Paris. Like, boy, stop. But he asked her to come with him, and in the interim, she finds out she's pregnant, right? So her cousin takes her to meet him before he's getting ready to leave to get on the plane. And she tells him, she said, her cousin says, you got to let him know that you're pregnant. Like, you got to let him know that he got a baby coming. So she goes to, I'm sure that was her intention, was to tell him, but she doesn't because, and I got it in the moment, I don't want you to not take this great opportunity because of the baby. Like, I want you to go, and this is a great opportunity. Again, remember, it's 1957. He's a black musician. Like, going to Paris to make some good money, boom. And so that's sort of where we leave off in that 1957. So then we come back to the present, and we see them meet up again at the concert. And I was thinking that her husband was supposed to be meeting her, but it was Mona that was supposed to be meeting her. And she says, well, I guess I'm getting stood up. And so she eventually asked him to join her. So they go to the concert together, and when she takes her gloves off, he sees her wedding ring, so he knows that she got married. Probably assumes it was the guy from the army, which it was. And we see that she does have a child, whole 5-year-old. And of course, when you do the math, 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. If you subtract 4, you still get 0. 9 months equal a baby, right? Okay, so he didn't do the math. Okay, it didn't occur to him that it was his baby, but okay. but they leave. He invites her to go have a drink. She says, no, I can't do it. He tells her, in casual conversation, she said she was staying at the plaza. I mean, he said he was staying at the plaza around the corner. I guess back in those days, they weren't that strict about telling people where room numbers are, because next thing you know, honey, she showed up at his door. They end up having a whole moment. Okay, they ended up in the bed, and that's when she tells him that she has a daughter and everything. And like I said, he don't do the math, Okay, and then she ends up going back home, and we see that she is living the life of a I'm gonna speed this up a little bit, y'all. I'm about to fast forward. She's working at the studio, but she's on the switchboard. She sort of tricks her way into an interview for an assistant to the producer, and finds out that the producer is a black woman, right? So of course her dream of being a black woman, female producer, has now been realized. Like, wait a minute, I didn't know they even existed until I met you. And we see where her husband was like, listen, we had a conversation that you can have your little job as long as it don't interfere with what you got to do here at the house, right? So we see that she's living this housewife life and sort of trying to still live her fantasy and dreams. And now Robert has come back in the picture and sort of thrown a monkey wrench into it, because Robert is the love of her life, right? And what we find out, I'm going to fast forward this. What we find out is that the husband knew about Robert and knew that the child wasn't his, okay? I mean, anybody with math knew that the child wasn't his. Her and Robert sort of have this hit and miss situation. He invites her to come to the club. She goes to the club. She lies to her dad. She lies to her husband. Her dad is her alibi, She says she has to work late. Her dad knew about the lie. I'm sorry, because she borrowed her dad's car. Her dad was like, listen, you need to tell him. And he's talking about tell Robert about the baby. And she was like, I will, I promise. So it seems like everybody knew that Robert was the big love of her life, right? And she gets there late because the car broke down or whatever. And when she gets there, she sees Robert with a chick that used to flirt with him back in 1957. She sees them together and she automatically assumes they're a couple, they're together. So those hit and miss moments. We found out that Miss Mona has become very active in the civil rights. So every time she's talking to Mona, first Mona was the one that stood her up for the party, because she had to go down south and do some stuff for CORE. Next time we see Mona is at the March on Washington inviting Sylvie down. We'll get to that in a second. So they had this whole hit and miss situation. Ultimately, the night that the car broke down and she was late, her husband realized that she lied to him because the job called and all that good stuff. And he told her, he said, listen, I've always wanted to be the love of your life. I never asked for you to, I've always wanted, anyway, basically, look, I knew you had this whole other man you was in love with, but I didn't settle for you, okay? I wasn't doing you a favor by still marrying you, even though I knew you were pregnant by another man. I loved you. And I really just hoped that he was gone, a whole other side of the world situation. I really hope that it would be us. So New Year's Eve, a couple of other, now here's where one of my frustrations with the movie, okay, 5 more minutes and then I'm gonna finish it up, because I'm ranting. The movie was good, okay. We fast forward to New Year's Eve, right? Like I said, Robert's kind of doing his own thing. Sylvie's kind of doing her own thing. And they fast forward to New Year's Eve. And we see Robert is at a New Year's Eve party with the guy that's the head of the band. And he is living good. Got his nice apartment, this whole thing working. And Robert goes to their manager. Well, I ain't gonna get into that whole manager situation. But Robert goes to one of the guys that they've been working with and says, like, I'm not understanding how he living like this and I'm still, barely making ends meet. Like, what's going on here? And he said, oh, well, the music. He said he's making money off of the music. And Robert was like, but I write that music with him. And the guy was like, but he owns the copy. He owns the publishing. He owns the copyrights. He was like, that's where the money is. So that might be great that you was helping him write this music, but your name ain't on nothing, which means that you don't get no profits. Now, let me pause right there. This is where I thought the story was going with the business side of this. I really thought that what was going to end up happening was that Robert was going to sort of get smart and either make some sort of demands of the guy that he's been writing his music with, or we see that there's a shift in music, right? We're moving out of the band era, the jazz era, and we're moving into Motown, right? We're moving into that era of the 1960s. And so, like the guy tells him, because Robert ends up going back to the guy, because the guy was like, listen, whenever you're ready to start your own band, let me know. So Robert ends up going back to the guy like, listen, I'm ready. And he was like, okay, so that ship has sailed. Jazz is dead, and there's really nothing I can do. I really thought in that moment what Robert was going to do was shift, because if you're a songwriter, you're a songwriter, right? You might not be able to write the lyrics, but you can write some good music, even though you're a jazz musician. I thought that's where Robert was going to sort of transition into, like, okay, people know, because remember, Robert was the star of the band. Again, I'm not getting into all of the details, but, and I thought that's where he was going to go, but that's not where the story went, and that's kind of where they lost me, right? That's kind of where I didn't like the direction the story went. Because here's what I hate. I hate when I see stories where you build up a character to be one thing, and then you shift it into something else. And so what I mean by that is, I felt like at the point where Robert should have figured out, okay, dude is making money off of me. I feel like he didn't make a move the way I felt like he should have made a move. And then I felt like they should have showed that Robert could be successful still in music, but in a different way. And they didn't do that either. And that was my frustration. Because I was like, okay, so we saw this whole thing where he couldn't find a job. He was out of work. He left the band without basically saying goodbye to go be with Sylvie. And I just thought it was crazy. So the rest of the conflict, they finally end up together. Her dad ends up having a heart attack on New Year's Eve. He called Robert from the hospital to tell Robert that was his child. Like, there's something you need to know. And so that's when Robert confronted Sylvie, and Sylvie ends up breaking up with her husband, and they end up together, okay? Again, go watch the movie to get all the specifics of how that went down. But now Robert doesn't have a job because he left the band. Jazz is dead. And so I just feel like he didn't transition. And I feel like he was smarter than that. I really feel like he was smarter than that, right? We saw when he tried to get a job in Motown. That didn't work out. Again, I'm not going to give y'all the details. Y'all go find out. And so because his ego has been hit as a man, and he feels like, listen, not only do I have a woman who's accomplished, because by now Sylvie is a producer. She's a producer of a show now. She's been promoted to the producer of her own show. And I'm like, okay, so she finally got her wish. And so Robert was like, listen, he asked her to move to Detroit when he thought he was going to be a Motown. And she agreed to do it. She said she would do it. But that fell through. And so when he came back, again, as a man with his ego saying, listen, what kind of man can't take care of his woman? He just tells her, listen, I got the job in Motown, but I don't want you to move with me. I don't want you coming with me. Which basically they broke up, right? So next thing you know, we see Robert working at the factory. Back in Detroit, because that's where he was originally from. So he's back in Detroit working at a factory. And she ends up going down to hang out with Mona after the March on Washington. And she runs into somebody from their past who says, hey, yeah, Robert's working in Detroit at the factory. He was supposed to be down here with us for Washington, for a gig we had after the March on Washington, but he couldn't get off work. And she was like, what, at Motown? She was like, girl, no, at the factory. He ain't at Motown. And so she talks to her cousin, and her cousin tells her, listen, she said, why didn't he just tell me what happened? I still would have moved to Detroit. And her cousin was like, and that's why. That's why. Because he didn't want to take your dream from you. That's why. And so, the movie ended with them working it out, and they, ended with them together like a family with the baby and everything. But overall, I love the movie. I thought it was a great movie. I love black love. I love movies that show black love. Even though she cheated on her husband and all of that, listen, that ain't me for judge. That ain't for me to judge, okay? That ain't for me to judge. But my frustration was just the way it ended. I really would have loved to see Robert transition into making music. I get the whole sacrifice thing at the end, but even if he had gone back to Detroit and did the same thing, I would have loved to. Oh gosh, y'all, sorry. I would have loved to have seen him hold on, let me turn my ring off. Let me just turn my ring off. I would have loved to have seen him figure it out musically. He was too gifted of a musician to not, and if he was writing the music, he was too gifted and too intricate in their success for him not to figure out a way. That's my opinion. So I love the movie. If out of a 10, I would probably give it a 9.5. I just didn't, that part of the storyline just didn't, I didn't like it. I just didn't like it. But I definitely would recommend it. Hell, I would watch it again. I thought it was really good. So I think all of y'all need to go catch it. I thought it was a really good movie. Definitely the period piece was very appropriate. Definitely the period piece was very appropriate. So y'all let me know what y'all think. Drop it in those comments. Peace.